Welcome to Packet Pushers Heavy Networking, the podcast that just gets to the good parts quicker than most people can crack open a textbook and find the right chapter. In today's sponsored show with Gluware, we are diving into the intent-based networking puddle once again, but we're doing it live from New York with Intent 19. So
live!
Now that's very kind, but we haven't actually done anything. I don't know why they're applauding before instead of after. But that said, I want to start off this discussion around intent-based networking with a controversial position. I want to lay this out. I'm very unconvinced that automation is the answer to software-defined networking. Now, let me explain, right? Let's say you start yourself with some SaltStack or some Ansible, and you start whipping up some templates and getting some automation in way. You get some playbooks going, and you start feeling pretty good about getting simple configuring a VLAN, getting the spanning tree working, and you've got some templates. And all of a sudden, the business is happy you're doing it better, faster, and more reliably. And it's so good, you wonder why you didn't do this earlier, so you think to yourself, I'll start doing some more. And you get yourself into a whole bunch of Ansible templates and you realize it doesn't really have any programming features. It's got very limited looping capabilities, it doesn't do decision making if then or, and you realize that you actually want to start integrating the Ansible templates with something else. You need to start learning Python to glue the Ansible templates into some MySQL databases, or if you wanted to call your Ansible templates from ServiceNow to do some automated provisioning, you're starting to go, oh, that's actually pretty kind of hard. So you start playing around with it, you upgrade from a YAML file, plain text YAML, and you start doing a SQL database because you want to do lookups, you start adding some Git so you can push the configurations in, and then you realize you need a config differ, and you're starting to wonder how bad your life is because now you're spending your whole time in some software configuration. So and then the second part about this is you've now got a software problem. You're a developer, you've got to do maintenance of the script because things change over time, you've got to store it, you've got to test it, you've got to maintain it, and you've got constant resource demands to just hold the status quo. So next time somebody says, I want a new device on the network, you say, well, sure, but I'm not available for 3 months to write that Ansible template. And guess what? You're right back to where you are again, right? So you start thinking about an orchestration tool. You think about some sort of orchestration platform, some SDN, maybe an open dayload or some sort of tool like that, and most likely you'll end up with something like a Gluware, and you start thinking to yourself, I need to use some APIs on the devices, I need to configure the firewall rules when I add a VLAN and an ACL, and then you start to think, hang on, what I really want is just to say, I want a policy so that everything can be done. And that's not what you can do with automation. It doesn't work that way. And then you're spending all your life maintaining the code, and you're starting to wonder what your life choices are because now you're back on the command line interface. You're, working your fingers down to bloody little stumps on the keyboard, writing code at 3 o'clock in the morning, saying to yourself, I wish I could go back to the CLI because that just seems easier. So with that perspective, and that's what Gluware is here to do, is partly the thing about the Gluware engine and the Gluware product and its model capabilities is that you can consume it in many different ways, and it actually kind of starts from the automation process to the orchestration process to the policy to the intent, and we'll hopefully cover that in today's session. So today we're actually joined by Jeff Gray. He's the CEO of Gluware. We've got Sal from Merck.
Rannazzisi, thank you.
And we'll have Jamie Hughes from Terracon coming on the show, and we'll also have a couple of other speakers dropping by as we rotate through. As is our want, we're going to start with a short introduction to Gluware before we get deeper into the features that we wanted to cover today. So Jeff, why don't you just launch straight in to tell us what's the elevator pitch around Gluware? What do you say to people when you first doorstep them?
Sounds great, Greg. Thank you very much. So Gluware is pioneering the concept of intelligent network automation. And what do I mean by that? There's two components. One is a concept that we call intent engineering, and that is about deriving intent from the networks that actually exist, that you're much smarter than we are, that you have networks that work, that have been built for a business purpose, and you don't have to replace them and rip them out just to be able to get automation. So this concept of being able to pull the configs, create models, move them into policies, and then overlay business intent workflows on top, you can get to intent without actually starting from scratch. So that's first. Second is our intelligent orchestration engine. And what that allows for is a high resolution insight into the network, and it even understands the order of every single character down in the CLI or REST and how that rolls up into one layer of automation so that you can push changes with confidence in a safe and predictable manner, even things like QoS across 20,000 nodes in a couple hours.
Right. So the couple of things there that I heard. One is you're willing to take on an intent-based approach from the existing configuration. So I can take my existing network, which might be full of all sorts of traditional, did I say legacy? No, I said traditional
You did.
equipment that's been out there for years with all sorts of weird and wonderful configurations, and bring all that into your engine, and then I can start to work with it. What's the magic there? Is that because I know that you use this model-driven approach, so you must take the configs in and then break them down in some way so that I can do them. But I would have to be involved with that somehow.
Correct. Well, you would have to be involved, but that's from a matter of onboarding, if you were a customer, onboarding your policy. So you know your network better than anyone else. We have a huge amount of IP in the platform, $47 million of engineering dollars that have gone in,
Okay.
8+ patents, many more coming. And this is all about ingesting and having an algorithm to ingest monolithic configs and break them up into functional feature blocks so you can start to create policies without needing to redeploy. And it works just as well for a brownfield environment as a greenfield environment. So this allows you to move from your current network and be able to race to any modern architecture at your own pace.
Is this for Cisco-only environments or multi-vendor?
Well, at this point, we support 19 different vendor operating systems and growing. So part of the intellectual property is a rapid way to go and dig into any vendor platform, do an analysis of every single feature, every single capability, and essentially create an adapter to be able to speak, let's say, English to Cisco, French to Juniper, German to Riverbed, et cetera, et cetera.
And also firewalls, because if I'm using a model-based approach, I can read the CLI out of a firewall, I can model that and then configure that as well. So it doesn't have to just be switches and routers, it can be anything that's got an API or a CLI.
Absolutely. Anything that has a two-way interface.
Now, the challenge here, of course, is that I have to do some work. So some intent-based networking products, they make you wipe the floor clean, you nuke everything, you roll out new products in fixed configurations. Well, that would be nice if we all had the ability to just take our data center networks and chuck them into bin and start again. But that's not always very practical. I've got problems today, not problems in 3 years when the next budget cycle comes around. So I've got work to do.
And so the dirty word is brownfield,
Yeah.
right? No one wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
And we used to be in the camp that you had to redeploy your network in order to get automation, and that's just a failed approach, right? And our customers have come to us and said, "Well, that's great, but can you do this or can you do this?" And we'd be dead in the water. And the fact that now it's so flexible that customers can onboard what you've already built. Right? It's giving customers the power, right? So they can have it their way, not our prescriptive way, if you will.
So, Sal, I want to ask you, you've been a willing victim of Gluware's product over the,
Yeah.
and had quite a lot of...
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Sure.
But more importantly, you're someone who's actually willing to come out and talk about it, and you work at Merck Pharmaceuticals. So why don't you
Yes.
just summarize in a few sentences, what you've done with Gluware, and then I'm going to ask you some penetrating, useful questions.
Yeah. No. So first of all, thank you for having me here. It's really a great honor and a privilege for being with you guys here. This is my second podcast with you guys. So we have known these guys for about 3 years now, and we started with IWAN. They were kind of a one-trick pony, and they exposed all the nerd knobs to us that we could actually go in and do things and do it in a linear fashion, where you can look at pieces of the config, you can look at a regex, and you can land commands or take commands out. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. So it makes it consumable, as we were showing in some of the demos earlier today. And you guys, we talked about this before, that all these magical, Juniper, all these people, these programmers, they just don't exist today. So
Yes.
what you said was I started on that road many years ago, exactly what you described.
Yeah.
And, but this makes it consumable and compatible so people can understand it and wrap their head around what's happening.
We took a show of hands earlier today, how many people working with APIs, and no hands went up. So we know there's people out there that are doing it.
But the
it's
flip
just,
side is hiring engineers who are going to cut code,
Yeah.
with rigor and quality is hard. And the ones who are out there have long gone.
Of course, yeah.
No doubt you've had some attrition of some of those people.
Of course we have,
right?
sure.
So, and the reality is the people that are on the ground, they're still doing CLI. So you really wanted to say, because you're talking, you've got stuff in your network which has zero downtime.
Yeah,
you can't just go and say...
exactly. You can't,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Or maybe one time at a manufacturing plant that's GXP. One time in 5 years, I'll say, okay, on Christmas Eve in about 2022, you can make a change at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
And this is the reality of what we live in.
I mean, it's
you know?
stupid and it's impractical, but it's a reality.
Yeah, well,
you can't go to the factory
if the
and
plant's
say...
not running, they're not making product, they're not
Yeah.
selling drugs.
But they can't shut down the plant just so you can upgrade a switch.
Of course not.
No.
Of course.
Well,
Right.
you could, but
Yeah,
when it blows up.
that'd
but
be an
funnily-
RGE.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nobody gets blamed if it's
Yeah.
just a hardware failure, but everybody does if it's a planned upgrade.
Yeah, if
That's
you
a
did
reality,
it.
right?
Yeah,
It's
of
stupid,
course.
but it's a reality. So that type of environment. Now, I guess the question here is, how did you justify getting Gluware into the organization to the level that you have? Because you're now orchestrating a fairly substantial part of your network.
Yeah, we've come a long way in a short time, I have to say. And don't tell anybody, but we were the first people to use our config modeling part of it.
Yep.
We were using the tool for a while. And I think, so we went all in with the site license because it fit our needs. We proved it to upper management. And usually, like, when you go up at the model level 8 of the OSI stack, that's where you run into resistance. But we proved what we were doing, and we had a very successful project by making all these changes to enable OneDrive and changing quality of service, all these, and saving real money. Cost of avoidance, is that real money? But we proved this to management, and then at the end of last year, we went all in. And
So it wasn't a big bang. What I'm hearing is that you didn't suddenly
No, of course
burst onto the scene with a nuclear bomb and tent-based networking. And
Well, that's what
confetti
people
streamed
thought.
out of the sky.
Right. Well, that's what people thought, of course. And it took people,
Yeah.
you got to spoon feed people, right? People just can't. And that's how we did. Okay, we're just going to take this little piece and we're going to change this piece, okay?
Yeah.
We're not changing routing protocols. We're not changing the control plane. Not yet, anyway.
All right, so you started
very small.
bite-sized, little pieces,
Of course.
SNMP configuration, stabilized syslog configurations,
Syslog, of course.
NTPs on really old devices.
Yeah,
And you modeled each one. So what was that modeling process like? What was it like bringing engineers in to do because Gluware has to be worked on. It doesn't just mystically do it. It's
Yeah, no, you're right. So I've said this before. This is 90% of work up front. Once you understand, and you talk about, like I always say to people, what do you want to do? What are your goals and objectives? We had very clear goals and objectives, right?
Yeah.
We had to fix SNMP because we were blind to a lot of the parts of our network. We had to fix costs. And once you started getting those pieces down, you're like, hey, maybe we can add this little piece to the puzzle. Maybe
Right.
we can add this piece. And now, some of those orchestration models, we have these huge threads of automation with dozens of pieces of the puzzle.
When you say pieces of automation, and for those people who are listening along at home, we've done a whole bunch of videos today, including some
right.
demos, right? What you've actually got is these decision trees of automation.
Yes.
You're almost saying, if this model, doing this, doing costs, take this configuration and push that to this device.
Yeah, but it's based much more intelligent than that because you're taking information from the box and you're examining that information. You're looking at a regex, and then you're either landing or removing commands based on what you specified in your command line. So you can understand it. It's consumable. People can wrap their head around it because they know that the CLI for cost. They know what an SNP list looks like. There's some very quirky things, right? If you read an access list and you write it, it's two different things. So every time you put an access list in, it looks like it's yanking it out because it has to, because it's not the same, right? And you find all these little really quirky things about the iOS that you may not have known before, right?
Okay, so let's hit some headlines here.
Sure.
You were at a conference recently, and I've got your slide deck from it, and you were bragging about a bunch of stuff there. You were saying things like 98% reduction in time to make global network config changes.
Yeah, that's not a lie. It is really very true, and we really did this before by
Wait a minute.
doing a SaaS product.
It doesn't mean, this has to do with your change control process, doesn't it?
So this has the change control process you cannot get away from. And since we had these incidents with the cyber thing, it's swung so far in the wrong direction as far as I'm concerned. But this is based on factual data on how long it took a service provider to manually log in to 440 routers and copy and paste commands. So this is real numbers, and then the money is real because we pay per change.
Right.
People who write these contracts are very smart. Anything over 7 boxes, it's a project. Then you need a statement of work, then you need money, and then they have to hire more people.
Because you don't have everybody in-house that's doing all of this stuff.
No, you're exactly right. We
Okay.
have local people in the U.S. We have some big campuses, right? And most of the people are offshore. So that's where these numbers came from. So after, we did 5 routers, 10 routers, 15, and it's like, let's go 25. Let's do all of Europe. Let's do all the Americas. Then at the point where it's like, well, let's do all of them. And look, I'm not going to lie. There was a few issues, of course. Some things happened, but generally speaking, we completely trust it now.
I can imagine though, as much the vendors or the product's fault. Old code, left alone for years, memory
of course.
leaks. And
But-
suddenly you start
right.
doing configurations on them, and it's like,
But a lot of that was abstracted. Like
Yeah.
these guys were, Jeff was very upfront. He's like, look, we're not going to support 3700 series router.
Yeah.
We're not going to support a 2800 or 3800. But it was completely abstracted, and it landed all the commands on those.
You're also talking about monthly firmware updates and code promotions. In the last few weeks, we've seen the major vendors have lots of problems like firewalls, routers, core data center switches. So all of a sudden, updating firmware has become, well, top of mind, I think, for more people than ever before.
Yeah, so that's a great point. Doing the iOS XE thing now on switches is very painful, as we probably all know. Routers, very easy. All of our sites are redundant connections, so that's a very easy part of it. But you're right, so at least now we can, right?
And you've also called out accuracy. Did you have a lot of problems with fat fingers? Because I know when I used to work with outsourcers, it was that Chinese whispers game. And then the configuration was, please make EIGRP work. And at the other end, it was EIGRP load balanced with stub zones, please.
Oh, yeah. I know. You're absolutely right. And, and I've talked about this a lot, and nobody wants to hear it, but every site is a snowflake, and you can't help building the snowflakes. By the time I go through this process to write a standard, everything else is already history, right? You go through it, you get all these signatures, you put it into minus and document them, all this stuff. So, and even to start with this, I could not find one router that matched our current standard, because as you change a standard, no one goes back and fixes the device. So it goes on, and it's like a death spiral, right? Sure. So you're everything all of a sudden out of compliance because it doesn't matter. And the other problem is that people take this file on their desktop that they might have been copying onto boxes for 10 years, and they just copy and paste. They take that file and they copy it over, or they take the existing file on the device and copy that over, with no regard for the endless hours I just spent writing the standard and going through the approval process, which is excruciatingly painful.
So, Jeff, how hard was it for you to keep up with Merck? Were you able to work with them? Like, what was it like getting Merck executives to buy into what you were doing? Were they willing to just sort of go, it works, give his money, or did you have to go through a cycle of commitment and proving and stuff like that?
Well, I'll be careful not to put words in their mouth.
Yeah.
So I'll give just a little bit of data on the process. As Sal mentioned, we were in IWAN pilot, and then there was the attack that happened that everyone knows about publicly, and everything went dark for a while. And then when Merck came back, it was, can you help automate our current network, not some future SD-WAN, right? It was our current network to help us move to Microsoft Azure that was mandated down by the board.
Sure.
And can you do that quickly for us? And frankly, we said, no, we can't, right? We were in the other intent-based, right, camp, which is got to redeploy. And that didn't work. So we were just dead in the water at that point. Sal and team came out to our offices in Sacramento, sat with us, gave us all the requirements, and lo and behold, a light bulb went on, and all of a sudden, config modeling was born, and that was about deriving intent from the actual network, and all of a sudden, from January when you guys came out to pushing into production in March, they sent us a YouTube video and said, congratulations, you're now in production. And at that point, it was 14 nodes, it was 80 nodes, it was
it kept going.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was exactly right. And so, look, this was a lot of work, and we did some small statements of work with these guys, but these guys had a lot. I don't even want to tell you how many hours in the game, Jeff, but there was a lot of time, there's a lot of effort, and it was a true partnership that we did it together because we knew we were building something much bigger than ourselves. And these guys had a lot of skin in the game, trust me. And it was a lot of work. There's no doubt about it.
All right. Can I swap you out with Jamie? Because I want to talk to Jamie a little bit about what he's been doing at Terracon, and we'll get you
100%.
back in a little bit.
Sounds great.
Sure.
Thank you.
So the other thing that I wanted to talk about, Sal, why they're changing seats, is how hard was it to convince the people that pay you your salary, like the higher ups, that this was a worthwhile bet? Like, you've talked about baby steps, so it wasn't like they were taking a risk or betting the company or, making that, resume generating event if it didn't work. But you still would have had to do some convincing to them that you were doing something that had never been done before with a vendor that didn't have a product.
I never said that never been done before. So
Yeah,
that's the first thing.
I'll make a
Remember,
note.
I line you
Make a
straight
note.
up, okay?
Don't say never been done before. Pro tip there, audience.
And I also
Pro
said
tip.
that glue is so smart, it will automatically make changes to the network every time something changes. So
Right.
that's another story. But no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I took a different tack. I've been at this game a long time, and look, we're a very large conservative company, obviously. And I made WebEx recordings, and I sent them out, and I showed these things. I recorded them for a lot of people, and it took some time to get there. And once look, it took a long time. We went by the time from January of 2018. And we did the site license a year later, which is very fast in Merck years.
Yeah.
This was primarily a risk discussion then? If I
It was
introduced
a
this
number
product.
of discussions. Yeah, it was a OneDrive discussion, a risk discussion, cost-saving discussion. There was a lot of pieces to this. Why, this tool fit our brownfield environment. Let's face reality. We're going to be brownfield for a long time. We're not an IT company, right? We're moving to the cloud. We're doing a lot of things, but we still have a lot of old stuff. I mean, a lot of old stuff.
You said cost savings, so there's also an ROI component to this.
That's
you
what
had to
really
pitch.
sold it to. Yeah, because we have the numbers. We know the statement of work,
Yeah.
what it really costs.
You've got a brag slide here saying you saved 220,000 per change on the global backbone.
Documented changes.
Yeah.
So there's, but plus the undocumented ones, it's a lot more.
Right, sure. So
Sure, won't say that.
So we're joined by Jamie Hughes from Terracon. Thanks for coming on the show. It's really good to have you here. You've been using Gluware for a slightly different purpose. You've been mainly focusing on OS upgrades and moving that cycle of change in your network a lot faster and automating the configuration deployment. Now, I guess the question here is, what's different between, you've heard Sal talking about what he's doing, what's different with what you're doing? How did your experience vary?
I think one of the things is, well, like you said, they had a different need at the time. They had a security issue that come up, and so that put priority to them. I guess our need is Terracon grows a lot by mergers and acquisitions.
Yep.
So we're adding a lot of sites. One of the problems that poses is we're shipping a lot of equipment out. And one of the pieces I'm finding is the versions are different on all these pieces of equipment. So that what kind of led us down to, first let's get the operating system across the environment, because when we go to automate, I don't want to have to go make 5 different configs.
So you're saying when you buy the kit from the reseller, it drops on site, it comes with some random iOS version on board.
Exactly.
And so, but you also don't want to ship someone to site just to load an iOS image.
That's exactly, like I said,
Right.
it's a nightmare to manage those logistics, or sometimes what happens is, if the technician's short on time, they don't get to it, then basically the box ends up with whatever version it came out.
Right. So you've automated that deployment cycle because
Yep.
you're buying so many businesses in a year. So rather than, go back to your brownfield and start pulling Gluware on that as a starting point, you've gone, every time I have to buy a new company and I have to pave that network into my standard, that's your starting point.
Yep.
Right. So how about, what sort of skills? So how did you skill up in that area? How did you get the skills to run Gluware? Because it's not as complicated as running a command line, like mentally memorizing all the different versions and having a spreadsheet with all the stuff in it. But it is not a non-significant step up, right?
No, it's not. I mean, I put a lot of resources into it. Like I said, learning how to use it. Any new technology like that.
Yep.
The biggest thing was honestly just going and getting a laboratory set up. So set up just a, some of the first things we did was actually pushing config out to the data center and testing it out there, because one of the pieces about that in the data center, we actually have resources around the environment that can work on those things. Out at the branch offices, there's no technicians or no technical people. So if I break something, there's nobody to fix it.
I was trying to understand your logic. I tested first in the data center. I'm like, really?
Yeah, I was a little surprised by that myself. I was like, really? That's pretty
You
good.
know,
I get it. If something goes south, you got a body there that can get in there and fix that thing.
And that's the piece. There's a body that's there. So
Yeah.
I know it sounds funny. And
Everybody's
I
got
said
a
that too.
test network. Some of them are also production.
That's
networks.
right.
So true.
But like I said, we test it out in the laboratory, and then what Terracon does that's might be a little different. Every quarter, the data center is complete down.
Yeah.
So every quarter we can actually do whatever, as long as after that
Wow,
weekend
you're
it's back
doing the
up.
old IBM mainframe, IPL,
It-
initial program load.
That's right.
Every weekend we use the IPL. Wow. So the other question I've got is, you're also using it for inventory management and compliance audit. So you're literally using Gluware to go and gather that data for you and put it into some form that you can use, or is it just so that Gluware just does it for you as part of the operations?
Well, one of the pieces about that is, like you said, one of my first questions was being new to the company, and looking at all these devices, what code versions do we have? It helps with pulling that stuff. What equipment's under support, what's not under support. Looking at those SmartNet contracts. I mean, if you get one of those, Excel documents from Cisco that's 50 pages long, but man, they're painful to go through.
Even when you've tried, they're not close to right.
So that's a huge advantage to be able to take Gluware now, and I have names that we recognize. Here's what we call our devices, and I have the serial number by it. I have the the date the support contract. I have the contract it's under. So some of those pieces really helped us kind of put all our devices back under support.
Right, so it's not all about fancy configuration and sometimes it's just saving you on paperwork.
Yep.
And straight up tedium, like that would just be like mind-numbingly tedious. That's not valuable work, that's just work.
That's right. It's not
Yeah.
valuable work. It's just
It's
work.
a sure sign that your vendor loves you when some service contract comes in. What about your experiences? So out of the outcome of all of that, you've got a consistent configuration through your data centers, but obviously, and through the sites. But what about headcount? Has your headcount reduced, or have you switched your headcount from, working on the CLI to just working in Gluware, or is there a transition underway?
Did the robots take anyone's job? That's what we want to know.
Good question.
And I think, like you said, when we sold this, it wasn't to reduce people, because we do acquire, and so one of the parts about that is we were actually looking at potentially hiring some more people. So I think as we roll Gluware out, that's actually going to probably just help to hold that off a little
Cost
bit longer.
avoidance.
Yeah, just a cost avoidance mechanism, really.
Right. So your next steps with Gluware then is what? What are you planning on doing? Quas, NTP, syslog, more configuration, more changes?
So Quas is the next big change. Getting ready to push that out. And one of the biggest pieces, as far as testing and all that goes, we've done a lot of testing in the lab on all the equipment. We have all the config wrote. Now it's more of the politics on the backside is, and also validating. It hasn't been touched in quite a while because there wasn't an easy way to automate this thing.
Yeah.
So going and validating all the models are right, because we look at this thing in our applications, we've moved data centers, so some of the IP addresses in our current model, they don't match anymore.
Sal's laughing because I reckon you just went ahead and did it when nobody was looking.
I can neither confirm nor deny that statement, sir.
Okay, so I want to stick with the customer part of this for just a little bit longer, because I want to ask you, for the people who are listening there in the audience and thinking, well, maybe Gluware's got a chance. I can see some vision around this idea of dropping this in and starting small and ramping up. And I want to lay out the vision that I still believe that Gluware's got. You could start small and then go large. You can go right the way through to the policy or intent-driven type of capability. So you start modestly, and then as you build up confidence, which I like, because that's how we've always operated in networking. Build up the pain threshold as you go until you reach a level of pain, right? So what was the biggest barriers to getting your teams on board with Gluware? Was there barriers, and how did you sort of break through them? Did people not want to do this? Did people have I worked with an organization once, and the networking team flatly refused to deploy an SD-WAN because it wasn't, they didn't believe it would work and just said no. And so this person actually had to go and hire a whole other team to roll out SD-WAN because his existing team refused to do it. So that's one way of handling automation, right? Sure. I don't believe those people are still there, because when the SD-WAN worked, it was a little uncomfortable. But, did you have problems with people? Did people push back, or did you have problems to work through? So why don't you start, Sal?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when there's something different like this, and I have called it the robot that will take the kids off the assembly line floor as well, and that's what it kind of is. But, I mean, there's such an influx of work and so much to do. I've talked to our service provider about it. I've showed them that, and they're going to start using the tool. It's going to free up people to do more incident management and that type of thing. But, of course, we just rolled this out. Oh, no, now we want this feature, right? And a lot of those kinds of things. Oh, no, now we need auditing trail. Now we need this. Now we need that. And we've opened feature requests, and we built a lot of these features into the tools we go on. But of course, people always have pushback. Anything different, anything new, and it's a natural reaction. And of course, that's a big thing. Well, maybe that I told them that my goal was to automate them all of their job didn't help so much, but
But Sal, you just said something really important there. There is no magic in sitting around at the command line and configuring a bunch of things. That's
course.
slow and takes a lot of time. The magic is in get the features in there and get it done, and then move on to other things that the business needs. And if you can do that, as you said, there's no end of work to do. So let's automate the stuff that takes a long time.
Of course,
Yeah. Let's automate the toil, the tedious work.
and that's exactly what we've done.
That's exactly. What about yourself?
Very similar. Like you said, I mean, there was a little bit of pushback on some of those things, but, honestly, one of the pieces, if you look at, though, I was like, why are you complaining? Today, we don't have consistent operating systems because, so we're not doing that work today anyway, so it's not like you're going to, magically come up with extra time.
Yeah, and you do. I mean, I don't want to see that Gluware is a bullet, but I think one of the things that people continue to forget is that networks today are way more complicated and more sophisticated than they were 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I can remember, maybe a bit longer, maybe 15 years ago, we were just happy to connect things together.
Yeah, sure.
Right? And we called it done. We put a fork in it and called that sausage cooked. Right? And we were all happy.
Everything works.
And then we all sat around and waited for it to break.
Yeah.
And that was it. Literally, we were there like as firefighters waiting for the fire. And we sort of, and then Quas came along and gave us a reason to exist. We just sort of futzed around with Quas to fill in the hours and the spare in the day, right? So I don't really, So I guess I'm sort of saying that people forget how much more complexity is nowadays. We've got more firewalls, we've got VMs, we've got public clouds, we've got private clouds, you've got overlay networks in the data center, we've got overlay networks coming to the campus, you've got wired, wireless, you've got Azure and all the public clouds. And how are you going to cope with all that if you're still thinking in terms of, I've got 50 routers, right? Because it's not true anymore.
And that's exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and the other piece about that is like you said, all those other things to do, and the business wants it fast.
Of course.
They don't want to have to wait. Like you said, if it takes 6 months, or we go to deploy a big change. I mean, some of them might not take as long as, like, we don't have near the environment Merck, but it still can be months to deploy out to all the branch sites.
I do think VMware's got we should be blaming VMware for doing virtual machines that can be deployed faster than we can make network changes,
Yeah, of
which
course.
kind of pulls us up a little bit. I don't think we talk about those sorts of things. It's true, right?
Well,
It used to take
automation
them
is
6 months to
so
order
far
something.
ahead in all these other different services, right, that because networking works the way it works and has such a broad impact, if we screw it up, we're really behind and it makes us look bad.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I think what I want to do now is I want to talk about how. So, you guys really have talked about, or to my mind at least, you've talked about automation and orchestration. You've got automating certain tasks, and then you orchestrate the fleet of automations that you've got in such a way that you work. So you've got to that point. And I guess what I want to do now is start talking about how we get to intent or policy. So I want to get some people on the stage who want to talk about that futures part. Jeff, who do you think we should get? So yourself and Michael? Mike? Sure. Yeah, come up. Thanks, guys.
Yep, sure.
Thank you very much. It's
Thank
great.
you.
Okay, so we've got Michael Haugh, who's the, Chief Marketing Officer?
Something like that. Actually, currently a VP of Product Management.
Visual Product Management, and an ex-engineer too, I believe.
An
so you're not
ex-engineer.
entirely mentally defective.
Absolutely.
Which
He's
is
an
okay.
ex-CCIE or current. I don't know if you
And
kept
did
up
not
with it, Mike,
maintain it.
but- Yeah, well,
Trying to forget about it.
you and me both, buddy.
Yeah. So what I want to do now is we've sort of painted this picture about where your customers are at today, and they've really talked about how they've used it, saved money, magic, blah, 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 all the good stuff. But I think the question here is, we talked in the opening with Jeff about intent and intelligent engineering. So if you were these, and this is the future part, this is where we're headed, right? Most people who are doing SDN today or intent-based networking today is very much I want to be there. They don't actually have the answer yet, but they're all working out how to get there. So I want to sort of drill into that as to where Gluware would say to a customer, we've got a vision going forward with you. So you're on the spot here for there. So let's start off with, how do we, I've talked before about the taxonomy that I have, which is this: you start off with independent, you do the automation, you move to orchestration, you move to policy, and then all of a sudden you're at intent. I just want to say, configure my cost policy to do this. I don't really care how it's configured down on the ground, just flow down to that. Now that's obviously a bit of a pipe dream, because the reality is that it really requires, at this stage, there's no way to automagically do that. Or there's no elven magic that's going to cut that yet, right?
Is that the question?
Yeah.
So, I mean, when I view intent, and honestly, I think it became kind of a marketing term, and then it kind of got backed up with Gartner and others that actually described what intent is supposed to do. And I think the grayest part of intent, in terms of not being well defined, is what is the level of intent we're talking about, right? And some people are saying it's this high-level business intent. Well, what does that mean, right? Like, I mean, so when you go to a
I want my network to work. Press
network
hard.
on, network off. I
Yeah.
mean, when
Put coins in the machine,
Exactly.
the network machine, and let it go.
when we talk to real customers trying to solve, real problems at the engineering level, they know what they need from a configuration policy perspective. So while I think things are trying to evolve into to an abstracted version, right? And I think business level we're talking about levels of abstraction. How do we get further away from the really low level stuff and get up towards things that are meaningful? And I think configuration policy and even configuration policy with constraints.
Yeah.
Meaning, and I think we expose this in Gluware as we certainly can expose vendor CLI.
Yeah.
That's not very abstracted.
No.
But we can also abstract it up into selections of constraints. And I think if you can expose some constraints, then you are closer to a...
And that's what
yeah.
everybody's doing today, is they're
Yeah.
saying, yeah, we can work out what you want, but only if you work inside of this sandbox.
Yeah.
So, like with intent-based data centers, they force you to buy new hardware build it into an ECMP and say, congratulations, we know what your intent is. And it's like, yeah, but it's a tiny little box with, all sorts of constraints, right?
And I love the analogy. I just came up with this one recently. I'm not sure because we've been trying different analogies on an intent. Is that, do you want a price fixed menu where you get, yes, you get an appetizer and a main course, and a dessert. However, you have one or maybe two or maybe three choices, but it's that. Or do you want a la carte where you can pick what you really want? And I think when it comes to networking, people are still really at a la carte. They really need to pick the things that fit for them. Whereas when you look at the price fix or a pre-design, they're saying, I like the idea of this, but it's not going to work in my environment unless I go greenfield, unless I'm a brand new deployment. And there's a lot of examples.
Modern hardware with APIs, fancy APIs that have commitment or all.
And there are examples of this. And in subsegments of the network, maybe a certain parts of the WAN or data center, you can go new and maybe try that. But big parts of the network, it's still not ready.
So I'm going to stir the pot a little bit because I was recently seeing a panel, and it was just a lot of talk, a lot of fluff, a lot of just keep abstracting to the moon or whatever.
About you, Ethan.
No, wasn't packet pushers. And everyone was asking, well, how do you really get to AI ops? How do you really get to autonomic change and things like that? And it was a lot of words, right? What I want to share is that we have a pragmatic path to get there.
Yep. And
when you look at being able to change a global network in an hour and a half compared with best case scenario of 6 months, that's a 98.89% reduction in time. That's a real number, right?
But I want to go back to this constraints idea, Jeff, because what you're talking about here is really hard to do if you don't have a constrained network. It goes back to this notion of the snowflake network, and that even within your global environment, you probably got a bunch of little snowflakes around, which is where those constraints come in. If you force everybody into that fixed price menu, if you will, or a fixed selection of items, then it gets a lot easier to do intent-based networking, because you don't have a lot of things you're allowed to intend, to speak.
But then my argument would be that's never really going to work in the real world. Right? So this gets back to solving real world problems. I mean, how would you possibly do monthly OS patching when some folks haven't touched it in years, right? How would you be able to move to 99% of any global configuration change in less than 24 hours with a 0% defect rate?
Most of the vendors aren't even ready to do that. They can't even validate that their images will reliably load on their machines, right? And some of them are using flash architectures which aren't stable. You have to do mystic magic to reformat the flash before the operating system, all this sort of arcane stuff. I think for the time being, or for the foreseeable future, say 2 to 5 years, it is going to be manual intent.
So there is something I want to pile on, because I do want to get to my punchline where I stir the pot a little bit, because that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
Right? When I'm going to speak with our customers, I'm saying, the self-driving thing, that's going to be in 5 years. I said, no. As soon as you're ready, we want it. And so we're in discussions right now, and we already deliver, you call it a poor man's autonomic capability. So anything that is a human process can be modeled. And that's where our workflow engine is not just a high level kind of go through and queue.
And it's not linear. It's branching, it's looping, it's a whole bunch of
stuff. It can go do device interactions on the fly, come back, make decisions. So what this means is that, for example, instead of the network team needing to wait until a call happens at 3 in the morning to say, hey, my application, performance is down, this can be scheduled and constantly going out, looking at latency, looking at APM, looking at capabilities, and then changing routing on the fly according to constraints, right? Yeah. And so it's use case driven autonomic, if you will. And so this goes back to what we were talking about earlier.
So this is where your API comes in. So you put the API around Gluware, so Gluware can be consumed by other things. So I can imagine some sort of help desk operating system, and it says the Wi-Fi in such and such a location isn't working, so the Gluware has a script to go and fire up a testing agent at a site and start creating a synthetic test to start doing something like that.
Yes, troubleshooting and then being able to respond
Yeah.
in real time are very,
But that
very
can't.
important.
Now the challenge here with AI, and this is my problem with AI ops, is it can't happen because to do that you have to have enough data to train an AI model on, right? And there's not enough networks in the world to train an AI model because every network is sufficiently different, right? Let's say I gave you 50,000 network designs. How many of those could be derived into a single standard model? Right? You know, we would talk to Sal and Terra, you know.
They could
Merck
be
and
derived
Terracon.
into a snowbank.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, a unique set of snowflakes in a bag, right? I don't think AI ops is ever going to happen because there's too much diversity. Like even Google Cloud and Azure and AWS, the networking potential configurations and the way people are deploying it and the rate at which they're forking their network code, there won't ever be a standardized model in which you can say this image is a monkey, this image is
Yeah.
a.
So this is where we're going to find out.
Yeah.
Right? Because this is an experiment, and the truth is, with Gluware's automation engine, we have a deeper amount of resolution in the network than has ever been there before. Right? And what that means is that we know every single character of every single config and how it rolls up into this data representation model. Right? We know all the show commands. We understand. We can go and collect logs. There's a lot of things. And so it's a matter of then training that engine on a per enterprise basis.
Yeah, I think we'll do more. I don't think we'll see AI. I think we'll see ML.
Well, wait a minute, though. The point you just made, Jeff, you said train on an per enterprise basis. So you can have AI ops that is not globally significant, but locally significant based on a training set of data that comes out of a particular enterprise. That's what you're arguing?
I believe, trending information, being able to, see what happens when you make a change or about to make a change and what the result might be. And the longer this is in, the more that we develop and the further we go, the more valuable this will be.
And again, going back to the notion of AI, if we're talking about training data, we're talking about software making inferences or recommendations about what you want to do based on what it's learned about your environment. So actually putting autonomy in the software itself.
That is correct, but limited, right? It's not this uber brain that does everything, right? It's the equivalent of dynamic cruise control for a car, or self-parking, or like.
So like an automatic cars start from zero.
Exactly.
Manual
And-
driving to level 5, but they might be like,
And this is what we've been doing with Gluware, right? It's like now we're at a place where we're at business intent with the workflows.
Yeah.
Okay. And now we're in a perfect position to be able to put a lot of intelligence on that instead of trying to just say, hey, let's look at the network and then make change. That's really difficult, right? So we've been working on foundations for years. Now we're at a point where customers are pre-purchasing this.
Okay, so this is not fantasy mode roadmap. This will be fun someday. You're actually, well, you said it's an experiment. We're trying to see what we've got to work with.
And folks are willing to write checks.
Okay.
But I
Helpful.
think, see, to me, Ethan, this is really about starting with what you've got. You can start, like, everybody's starting small with some Ansible and some Python. And then pretty soon, it'll be like me back in 2002, 2003, when I was hand carving Perl scripts and with Tickle, right? And there's not a whole lot of difference between, there's some qualitative differences and some logic differences between the two, but at the end of the day, we pretty quickly decided that Perl and Tickle was a dumb idea. I also did Perl on SNMP on Nortel, on Bay Network stuff.
I'm sorry.
back in the day. Yeah, no, really, yes. I'm sorry. There's a whole part of my life I'm never getting back. And I just think that, that it's not yet proven to me that the scalability in an increasingly complex environment for hand-rolled automation is proven. And so I'm going to go with the fact that Python and those automation have limited horizons. That's not to say they're not useful, and that's not to say that putting Ansible on top of Gluware is not useful.
Well, my argument...
I could see ServiceNow pulling an Ansible template on Gluware, and then Gluware suddenly pushes out and goes...
My argument going back to interop events that we've done in the past has been simplicity is what's going to drive a lot of this. But, Jeff, you do make a real-world point. Yeah, but everybody is a snowflake. That is what it is, and that's what we've got to work with. You can't expect everybody to conform to these highly constrained models just to get us automation.
And I think building off that point, I think when I look at what's out there from other companies who are viewed as maybe leading an SD-WAN or even leading cloud companies, when you look at how do you automate cloud networking or how do you automate these SD-WANs, they're template based. And I mean, for me,
they're still hand carved.
It
They
is.
might be using a template, but they're still hand carved.
And this is the disappointing part is that yes, it's central control and it's some sort of centralized configuration management, it's some sort of centralized monitoring, but the config piece really breaks down because you end up with template sprawl, because every site is, not every site's unique, but large sets of sites are unique, and now your job just shifted from device management to template management.
But the simple
and
point
it
is
just
that
you just move the problem.
You can
And
do
I mean,
so
I think,
much. You can do so much magic with automation that just calculates two ends of an IPsec VPN configuration and does the ACL calculation for you. Right? That feels like, because how many times have I gotten that wrong? Just like inverting the masks and all that rubbish, right? And I just don't want to stress my brain. I'm getting old and slow, right? And it's just not worth it. So I think the part that I liked about the stories that we had today was they started small, ramped up until as their confidence level went with it. But then there's also some sort of, I like the scalability and the increasing complexity stories that Terracon and Merck told us. That increasingly over time they went from small to big, and you can see the complexity story emerging and keeping that under control. So,
Yeah, I think what contributes to that are all the pre-checks and verifications that happen, again, because as we get to intent, probably the most powerful thing of an intent loop is that the verification side of it. So in an intent loop, you're automating the push of the policy or configuration, and then you're verifying it. And because Glue has the verification step, your changes are reliable. And then the fact that you can kind of do a print preview.
yeah, that's the other thing about it.
Just seeing what
Python
change
scripts
is going to
doing the
happen.
verification is
Yeah,
enormous.
there's no script I've ever written where I can preview what the change is going to do. I'm just like, well,
right.
hope this works, and that's why you got to test the heck out of them. And people get short. They shorten the test cycles. And I mean, we can see this in even the code running in the devices we're automating. They're speeding up their software cycles, and quality tends to go down.
Any final words, Jeff, before we hit the wrap?
We very much appreciate being on your show.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for being at our conference. And to all you in the audience and everyone who's listening live, thank you very much for your time. This is just the beginning. The fact that there are real world wins and our customers are here, are valuable customers. Thank you so much, Sal, and thank you so much, Jamie, for being here. And we look forward to your feedback. We look forward to engaging. And I believe that most of these things that we've talked about are reality either now or in the very near future. So,
Well, on that note, let's hit the wrap here and get this show on the road, because you're between me and alcohol, right? So,
that's right.
So again, thanks to our guest Sal Rannazzisi from Merck and Jamie Hughes from Terracon. Thanks so much for making the time to come and talk with us today. Thanks to Gluware for sponsoring this event. If you want more information, please head on over to gluware.com/packetpushers. There's a page there where there's some white papers and a call to action. And you can also fill out the form so that a sales attack squad will be on its way to you within hours, which is important. And but maybe, I'm absolutely convinced that there's a waiting sales team just waiting to tell you more about their product. We also have a whole range of video content. Ahead of this podcast, we did a bunch of demos. So there's screencasts and so forth that you can see on the Packet Pushers YouTube. If you head on over to YouTube and just type in the words Packet Pushers, you'll be able to hit our channel and you'll be able to see all of the videos there from the Gluware Intent event. So if you wanted to see a little bit deeper into the configuration upgrades that we talked about and the demos around configuration drift and how the process of how that demo works, you can see them and you can see the workflows in those demonstrations. And as always, head on over to packetpushers.net where you can discover this and over 1,000 other episodes from across our podcast network on networking for infrastructure professional, along with our community blog and news feeds. Tweet at Packet Pushers, follow us on LinkedIn, rate us on Apple Podcasts, and you could support us by becoming a premium member at ignition.packetpushers.net. And last but not least, remember that too much networking would never be enough. Thank you.